All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. This is December 3rd, and I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're new to these sessions, I'll just give you a little bit of a recap as to what we do, the format that we go through. We're typically going through a recap of the latest news, the week in solar. And then we will do a overview of some of the webinars, events that are coming up over the next month or so. And then we do a deep dive into a topic that's of interest to myself and hopefully to other people who are interested in solar. And this week we've got Luther here with us, Luther Krieger, who is going to be speaking about solar cookers. So we'll talk a bit about that. So let's go ahead and jump straight on into this for the week of December 1st. So during 2024, grid operators across the country managed to maintain enough capacity during the hot weather to keep the grid operational pretty much across the nation. And this despite the fact that they were closing down quite a number of coal and natural gas power plants. What they did is they used wind, solar, and even battery storage to get through those peak load demands. That's basically the summary of a report that was just issued by NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, highlighting some of the success, because it was a pretty successful year for the grid, in maintaining services during the hot summer months, where oftentimes we run into, because of excess demand, we get some power outages during that period of time. The new report describes summer grid operations in several regions, but they really focused on ERCOT, which is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. In an extended period of hot weather starting in Texas in early August of 2024, temperatures averaged about 102 degrees Fahrenheit within that state. Summer peak demand hit its maximum on August 20th. And during the peak hour, so the peak hour of the peak day of the year between 4 and 5 p.m., as an example, solar generated about 21% of the total electrical generation. Now that's up about 50% over how much solar generated the year before. A significant increase in solar output reduced the risk of power outages and the need for alternative generating sources to keep the lights on. The solar output also shifted the period of highest risk from the late afternoon. And I always like to tell students that if the zombie apocalypse happens, it's going to happen between 4 and 5 on a hot summer, August afternoon. But it shifted that peak load demand period to about 8 p.m. and it shortened it significantly. So this allowed the utilities to then use storage to meet this peaker load as opposed to relying on natural gas peaker plants during that same period of time. Now, the American Clean Energy Power Association has forecast that the U.S. is set to add 32 gigawatts of utility scale solar capacity in 2024. That's significantly higher than the 22.5 gigawatts that was added in 2023. This year's installation numbers are set to beat the record that was last year by 44%. Now, overall, solar installations, including residential, commercial, and utility scale, are up about 51% over 2023. But market analysts don't expect this growth to continue into 2025. They're pointing towards increased tariffs on imported solar panels that are raising the pricing, as well as uncertainty surrounding the incentives that have been put in place by the Biden administration that may be curtailed by the incoming administration. So, what the industry is really projecting is about a 16% drop in solar installations in 2025. This, according to data from CEA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, and the analytic firm Wood Mackenzie. Growth from the utility scale solar resulted also in dramatic increase in power delivered from solar, particularly in the summer months, as we mentioned, where sunlight is at its peak, but so is electrical demand. This year, for example, on the hottest day of the summer, power generation from solar was up 83% over that same date last year in 2023. Despite the uncertainties, Wood Mackenzie is pointing out um, in their analytic report that they do anticipate that the renewable energy industry, especially solar, will be very robust over the next 4 years, even with the uncertainties about what policies are going to be put in place by the new administration. Well, there's a lot of uncertainty here in the US about how we're going to transition from the fossil fuel era to the age of renewable energy. This transition is well underway in the rest of the globe. According to a new analysis from the think tank Ember, evidence is growing that the planet has already reached or is just about to reach peak carbon emissions from the energy sector, from the power sector. A third of all of the richest nations in the world are already coal-free when it comes to generating electricity, and coal consumption worldwide has been cut in half over when it peaked in 2008. Now, while this was another record-setting year for renewable energy growth across the globe, there was also a steep rise in the demand for electricity. So we actually saw an increase in fossil fuel electricity generation as well. In fact, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, is forecasting that by 2030, we really should only see about a 3% drop in the use of fossil fuel in electricity over what it was last year, despite the fact that renewables are growing at double digit. And speaking of global saturation of solar, Brazil has reached the magic 50 gigawatt capacity, according to the Brazilian Electricity Regulatory Agency. Now, this milestone puts them into the top 6 of installed base of solar in nations nationwide. They're behind China, which is far and away number 1, the United States number 2, India in 3rd place, followed by Japan and Germany. Rounding out the top 10, we've got Australia, Spain, Italy, and South Korea. Currently, solar generates about 20.7% of all of the electricity in Brazil. That's second to their largest source of power, which is hydro, which generates about 60%. And wind is third. So actually, when you combine these together, you're getting about 95% of the grid's electricity coming from renewable sources in the country of Brazil, which makes it one of the least carbon emitting countries in the world. Now, industry has also seen a dramatic rise in solar. In fact, they've shot up to number 3 behind China and the United States over the last 9 years. Just to give you a sense of how quickly this has grown, they have seen a 26-fold increase, 26 times the amount of solar that was installed in that country just 9 years ago. And that is the news from the solar industry for this week. Does anybody have anything they would?
Jay, I was
Yeah.
just thinking because Canada didn't make that top 10, correct?
Right. Yeah, their installed solar is not that great, but they have a lot of hydro.
But
So
I was thinking too when I was up there last time, wind has become extremely popular up there.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I would
you go through Windsor and that. I mean, there's actually hundreds of windmills up there.
uh-huh.
So I think maybe because of their shorter days and the shorter summer, maybe they decided to go the other way instead of solar and focus more on the. Because I've been to the East Coast, the West Coast, and they seem to there's a lot of wind generators out there.
Yeah, my guess is that, the advent of solar is oftentimes a factor of how expensive electricity is in the area. And since they have such an installed base of hydro, I would imagine their electric costs are fairly low. So there's just a little less of an incentive. But also, we look at the growth of solar and we think in terms of residential solar. But residential solar is just a tiny little sliver of the overall solar pie. A vast majority is utility scale. So if the utilities up there are already primarily hydro, they probably are not investing the same amount as we're seeing in the United States or some other countries that have been heavily coal or natural gas dependent.
Well, trust me, the price of hydro, they call it up there, is not any cheaper.
Yeah.
And one is, yeah, but I think primarily uh, the government of Canada a long time ago decided they were going to be energy efficient. And Ontario claims to be, I believe, 80% renewable energy now,
Well,
maybe
but
even higher.
that sounds about right. Okay, yeah, because they are very dominant in hydro. Okay, anybody else have any comments there on the news this week? I should point out for those people looking at this on video, this is an interactive forum, so we've got a number of people joining from around the country and around the world, and so it's always great to have those comments. It makes it more interesting for me. I don't like to hear myself talk. So, all right, so let's talk about some of the events that are coming up. Speaking of the incoming administration on December 4th at 11 a.m., and all of these webinars that are coming up, I'm giving you an Eastern time. It's basically a webinar about what does the incoming Trump administration mean for the solar industry. That's being offered by Wood Mackenzie. Then December 4th and the 10th, there are a couple of sessions here in the state of Ohio talking about REAP, question and answer sessions in Northern Ohio. REAP is the Rural Electrification for America program that's offered through the USDA, where you can get grants for agricultural or small rural businesses up to 50% of the cost of installing solar. December 5th at 10 a.m., AI data centers and energy in Europe. Then also on December 5th at 2 p.m., post-sales processes. So that's another one by Solar Power World. EVs and solar is being offered by Solar United Neighbors. That's on December 5th at 3 p.m. Then December 10th at 10 a.m., Wood Mackenzie is offering another webinar about carbon removal, and how that's going to affect the energy transition. December 10th at 2 p.m., there's a session here on Fronius inverters, their next generation of inverters, if you're interested there. And the 10th at 2 p.m. also is talking about interconnection for community solar, some of those bigger projects that are out there. And December 11th at 1 p.m., we have Fortress Power batteries. So Renview often puts on some really nice little webinars. They're very product specific, but if you're looking at that product, it's good to join in. December 12th, AI and solar. There's a lot of stuff out there about AI all of a sudden. Just it seemed like there was a wave of the AI hype and discussion, and then it kind of went away, and now it's coming back a bit. December 12th, commercial scale storage items. That's at 2 p.m. there through Solar Power World. And then SunGrow is going to talk about their 200 kW string inverters on the 19th of December. And there is a conference in Dallas, Texas, February 11th through the 13th, PowerGen International. Another conference, Intersolar in San Diego. That's from the 25th through the 27th of February. And then I've been promoting here the NABCEP conference coming up in March. That's going to be in Reno, Nevada. These NABCEP conferences typically have a limited enrollment, and they do tend to sell out. So if you're interested in that, you might want to register early. And speaking of registering early and often, we've got our programs, the in-person and online training courses through solarpvtraining.com, which are always available there, and our ninth edition of the textbook, which is out and perfect. What can I say? So that's the news and that's the events. So before I jump into our speaker here today, anybody have anything they want to add or any announcements they want to make to the group? Give you just a second. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in to the presentation topic, and I invited Luther to join us here today to talk about solar thermal cookers. And this isn't exactly solar electric. I won't get into exactly what it is because Luther can certainly do that. But I want to thank Luther for joining here today. And I'll turn it over to you, Luther. You can introduce yourself and give us a little bit about yourself as well.
Sure. Thanks, Jay. When you called me on such short notice, I thought maybe Trump had announced that he was going to nationalize the solar PV industry or something, and that you wouldn't have any other news. So,
Now that's coming in January.
okay. Okay. Can you see my screen? The PowerPoint?
I
I hope
can.
that's
Can anyone else?
okay. Great. Well, yes, solar thermal cookers, but I will talk about solar PV as it applies to solar cooking, especially with regard to organizations that are trying to promote any kind of clean energy for cooking in the developing world where they're deforesting to beat the band just for cooking fuel. So, in case I put you to sleep, just write down my email address and my phone. You can call me later for a copy of this or any other questions that you might have. And then, last but not least, I have interviewed real experts. I am not the expert, but I've talked to just about everyone who is around the world. And my YouTube channel, Solar Cooking Museum, is probably the second best place to go. I'll talk about the first place later on. But to talk about solar thermal cooking, why should we all be doing it? Well, it's the greenest possible way to cook. I love PV. I've got 6 kilowatts on my roof, but the mining of materials and manufacture and the challenges to recycling and so forth do make it not quite as green as all the rest. It's probably second best to solar thermal in my book, but I'm a firm believer in solar PV. But I've been a maniac about solar cooking for 20 years, collecting solar cookers. And the reasons are many. The main ones are the clean. It's the cleanest possible energy source. There are manufactured and DIY models of cookers that are just as powerful as anything in your kitchen, just about. Some will really amaze you if you've been into this. You've probably seen them. And big reason I got involved, I've been an ecologist all my life. And I remember moving to Bowling Green, Ohio, when they had shortly before had put out the last fire on the Cuyahoga River. And I was just in junior high. And so I was really concerned about the rest of the world. And some of the problems that are caused, especially by deforestation and by smoke from wood stoves and so forth, this fixes them. This fixes them. So, lastly, it's really a lot of fun to be able to just say, look, I cooked this without the grid. I didn't have to pay the man for energy to cook with my solar cookers. And again, I will talk a little bit about how PV factors into the whole scheme for getting solar cookers into people's hands as well. This is just an illustration I try to use. It's probably the best animated illustration for how a solar cooker works. That's a cross section of a Parvati reflector cooker. So it's just a reflector, and then you put pots in the middle, and you surround them with an oven bag, or a lot of people use two Pyrex bowls for a heat trap, and they get the job done. Think of them as kind of like the slow cooker. But some of them, like the Haynes model, is so powerful with an almost parabolic shape that you can bake with it. And I definitely won't get into the technology or the science behind it. All of you could probably laugh me out of the room with my thinking on that. But the illustration to the right about the energy and how much sun energy reaches the Earth at any given time, I feel like that's a pretty good one. I've used that for presentations before. Okay,
Hey
so when you
Luther, hey Luther, can
yes,
you go? This is Paul. Can you just go back 1 second? Like
sure.
the diagram is pretty, but I don't understand it. um,
Oh, the
so
Earth's energy budget?
I understand the Earth and how that works,
Right.
but the little diagram that you talked
Oh,
about,
sure. Sorry, I should have
yeah,
gone on.
yeah, just take a moment to explain what's happening. Yeah,
Sure. The red ball, think of that as the sun. It's passing overhead, and the blue lines are the sunlight as they descend onto the planet and into the bowl of the reflector. And as they bounce off, this one is it's a parabolic basically, but with flat edged round reflectors. And so you can see where the sun is reflecting on almost the entire set of pots for the stretch of probably a couple hours as it's going overhead. So you can cook stuff in a panel cooker without having to even reorient it toward the sun.
I got it.
I
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was a parabolic mirror, is approximately that you were trying to illustrate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. And so now, if y'all just do a quick inventory of the cookers that you have in your homes, in your offices, And you probably have, I have just about every group I polled, they have at least five and sometimes seven or eight. We all probably have a crock pot. We definitely, pretty much every household has an oven where you bake inside, and then the stove top, that's a different cooker. That's a different way of getting energy to the pot. And the microwave. How many of you have a microwave? How many of you have a grill on your deck and so forth? Toaster oven. Those are all ways of cooking. Well, you have a pretty close equivalent types of solar cookers. And to start off with the easy one, easiest to make, there are a lot of very powerful commercial models. That's the reflective panel cooker. Solar Cookers International asks us when we talk about solar cookers to not just say panel cookers, because a lot of people say, well, where's the PV? But it's not a PV panel, reflective. So these panel cookers, they're more like the crock pot, the slow cooker. I have put stew into the Hanes without having to move it over a given day from about 9 to about 4:30 or 5. We got piping hot stew for 6 people in the pot by the end of the cooking day. So it's just like a crock pot. Box ovens, if you've got an oven, well, there are the second row, there's two cookers that are manufactured. The one on the left is really cool. It's made with cork. So cork, and not only is a sturdy body for it, but it replaces a lot of plastic and it serves as the insulation. And just one reflector, and that's enough for that to be baking. There's a woman in Australia that has a double wide version of this that she uses all the time when she has sun. And the box oven on the right, that's the Sun oven. That's been produced since the late 80s, early 90s, I believe. It's the workhorse, still being made today. Third one, parabolic. That's more like if you want to do a wok and stir fry, really high heat, broiling, frying. That's the cooker, because that concentrates as much sun as you got a diameter to that bowl into as small of a point of concentrated heat as possible. The thing we do when we demonstrate, and we have kids in the audience, we always put a stick in the focal point of the SK14, which is the one on the left. It's 1.5 meters wide. And within about 10 seconds, it is smoking. In about 20 seconds, it's burst into flames. So clearly it's reached the 451 Fahrenheit, the ignition point for wood. And the one on the right is the Simplicity, which is a foldable parabolic. I keep it in my car whenever I go on my video road trips. Very handy, takes up very little space, very powerful cooker. And then there's all sorts of other models. The bottom row on the left is the GoSun Fusion, which is a hybrid cooker. It's a vacuum tube, so very highly efficient as far as the heat concentrating very quickly with the parabolic trough reflectors, but also it has an electric backup. So this is a case where it comes with its own set of PV panels where you can charge a battery or hook it directly to the cooker to cook with electricity from the panels. Generally, you want to charge the battery because that's meant for if the sun goes away and you need to cook at night and so forth. And the one on the right, it's a rare model, but if you've seen Fresnel lenses, they're in just about every very old rear projection TV. Those are very powerful, but also very hazardous unless they're made like the one on the right at the bottom. California Sunlight's Bing Goo set that up so the focal point of that Fresnel lens, which is 1,000 degrees or more, and the focal point never leaves the cooker. So it's the safest possible model for that. And now I'll go through each a little more with a little more detail. Not much more, but this is the Hanes panel cooker. He is a retired Rotarian, or he's a Rotarian, but he's a retired federal prosecutor who went on one mission to distribute solar cookers. And when he came back, he said, well, the model they were distributing didn't seem to be as efficient as it could be. And he set out to design as efficient a panel cooker as possible. And I believe that he has. It's about as close to a parabolic that is formed just like origami, where you have a flat sheet of the reflective stuff, snap it together, crimp it together, slice it at the right places, and you've created basically a parabolic. And it comes in it has two colored snaps, red and blue. So if you're in a high sun or the equatorial area of the world, you just always put it on red. In Minnesota, we're often switching to blue, which is for low sun. So if you want to cook in the winter, which you can, by the way, you can do that. I sometimes hedge my bets and I put the red for the back reflector and the blue for the front. And by the way, with each of these cookers, I list a bunch that are in production in the lower left, just for the sake of there's so many of them out there. Box ovens. Rose Kern, very active with solar cooking and promoting it in Albuquerque. And she, of course, bakes and cooks stews, whatever she wants in this box oven. But she is making jars of apple butter. She's making her own apple butter with this thing. It's just as flexible as your indoor gas oven, and it's got those four reflectors will increase the amount of temperature from anywhere from 250 to I've had it up as high as 425 here in Minnesota at 45-degree latitude. Um, and there are probably about 6 or 8 commercial models out there in the $400 to $500 range. They do take a little bit of, they take a lot of aluminum. It's spectral grade aluminum, which is highly polished and a lot more expensive than just your roofing flashing. But they last forever. Most of them come with a clear ceramic coating that you don't even see that prevents scratches and preserves it. Parabolics. These are the wok. These are the stir fry models, and this is just a bunch of vegetables we tossed in one day. And the great thing about the parabolics is if we haven't planned what we're going to eat and it rolls around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, we can still get a good sized amount of food fried up in a pan or 2 or 3 because we've got more than one parabolic cooker. And again, the lower left, there's other ones. The Solar. I'm sorry, I should have taken that one off. I haven't updated this one yet. But the Simplicity in France is a foldable version. It's just shy of a meter wide. And it was set up with a deep parabola. This one's a shallow parabola. So if you don't keep this one attended to and that focal point strays, you can set fire to anything that's combustible within range. And I know from experience that's the case. So I always keep that well secured. But this is the work of the big powerhouse cooker. And if you want to do volume, well, I'll give you volume. This is Mark Shook in northern Kansas, who has a wood-fired pizza restaurant and traveling wood-fired pizza grill that he goes around with. And he said he was really tired of loading up all the wood and using up wood. And he found out about the Villager and was able to finagle one to be shipped to him in the States. Ordinarily, Sun Oven will only ship these to countries where they have refugee camps or dire needs at monasteries in areas where they're deforesting and so forth, so they can have literally cook for a village. They say 25 to 30 loaves of bread can fit in there. I've never tried. I'm sure it can be done. But Mark is in this video cooking for about 30 people for a 3-day festival. He and his wife in this small town in northern Kansas set up. And they pretty much cooked to order. What would you like to have in the morning? And they would get the ingredients and put in there in the afternoon. And they're able to feed them all. Another community scale cooker. By the way, if you're not doing anything May 5th, 6th, and 7th, 2025, Marseille, France, Solar Cooking Conference at next to the Le Presage restaurant, which is a solar cooking restaurant. It is a Fresnel, it's a parabolic Scheffler reflector, which not only is it a parabolic, but it's also tuned to be able to kind of shrink and expand depending on the time of year. To make sure it's grabbing sunlight at the optimum, and it sends it to reflectors inside the kitchen. In this case, it's a converted shipping container, but they have just built an official restaurant on that very site. And they cook, when I visited Pierre-Andre Aubert, the owner, he must have had 50 customers an hour pass by behind him. I've got a video of them just streaming back and forth. And on the griddle there, it's just like your greasy spoon restaurant. It's just a cast iron griddle, and it happens to focus in one spot with about a 5 or 6 inch hot spot where the pot keeps going with their daily dish. Boiling constantly. They're constantly just refilling it. And to the immediate right, they can still fry stuff. And the far right, they can keep all their food warm, all from the sun, no gas. Incredible. Now, here's a case. This guy's a missionary, Steve Harrigan in Indiana. And in his time in Africa, he said, people will still cook with wood. They'll have to when it's raining or it's nighttime and they have to cook late. Maybe they've been working in the fields all day. They have to cook and the sun has gone down. He says, so he came up with this box cooker. It's almost like the Son of a Villager, just a 55-gallon drum that he has converted to add reflectors, and it comes up to 300 plus temperature for baking. But also, he says, well, if they're going to have to cook because it's the clouds are rolled over or they've got monsoon seasons in some of the countries he's served overseas, he says, I'm going to attach a rocket stove. So at least they're cooking with the wood more efficiently. They're burning it more efficiently for the high heat. And the double whammy is not only does the flue heat up the inside of that box, inside the barrel, but the chimney at the other side also has room for another pot that it still is hot enough where it will boil soups, stews, noodles. That's what he's got going there. He's basically doing triple duty with this thing. So there's just all sort of creative stuff going on out there. And oh, yet another community scale cooker back at Le Presage. That is not a vacuum tube glass tube. It's just basically one layer of glass and then one layer of stainless steel, and then a tray that they throw in there with stainless steel. And when I came up with my camera, I said, "Oh man, buttery mushrooms, one of my favorite side dishes." He says, "No, no, it's eggplant. It's their signature eggplant dish." And I don't care what it is. Serve me up a plate right now. Just incredible. Large volume. They can keep that thing filled about every hour or so. They could serve that much that amount of their signature eggplant dish if they wanted to. Um, and these are all commercially available. Pretty much every one that I've shown you. This was a little pricey, about 7,000 euros. So we got a little pocket change you want to serve for your next Rotary Club or block club meeting. Buy one of these. Okay, and here's where the PV comes in. It is emerging from about 3 or 4 years ago. I interviewed a fellow, Doug Danley, who is in Maryland, and he was a solar PV guy to the hilt, retired. Someone called him up once and said, "Hey, could we use these to cook with the sun?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. PV is probably still too expensive, and induction cookers, I don't know." But he got off the phone and he said, "I better have done my homework." And he had to apologize, call the guy back, and say, they'd passed the break even point for what seemed to be economical for producing and distributing them. And the advantage they have is, of course, you can set up one of these, as the Secoca one and the Sunspot PV have a battery that stores the energy as it's charging, or it can use the sun directly to heat up the food. And you can have any number of USB ports and any USB powered stuff, phones, lights in a home. I told him at the end of our chat that my dream is for the day that will come when a village will be full of these, and when the power company finally gets to their door and says, "Hey, you're in luck. We're going to attach you to the grid now," they can say, "Pound sand. We got our own grid. Thank you very much." Anyway, so these are emerging. They're having as much trouble distributing them as solar thermal, just for the sake of we're up against big oil. They are really trying to get people hooked on subscription models of LP gas and so forth. So, but they're out there. I listed the deforestation. That's the biggest reason, the most immediate, easily seen solution. A refugee camp in Nepal saw a deforesting stop immediately after they distributed about 7,000 of those SK14 parabolic cookers to on the order of 80,000 refugees. And over time, they were able to distribute them through the country or relocate them, and it closed up. But they basically preserved a forest by doing that. Because if that would have just stayed there, like the Kakuma camp, if you've heard of Kakuma in Kenya, it's been around 40 years. People have been born and died there, knowing no other place to live. Well, if that would have happened and they would have kept deforesting, forget it. Also, just plain the respiratory diseases from indoor smoke. A lot of people still cook indoors with smoke without the appropriate ventilation. Waterborne diseases. This was probably the first hook I had when I decided to start looking into solar cooking. Was hearing about kids that were 10, 12 years old in Africa that their only water source had river worms. And if they survived to 12 years old, they were lucky if they weren't blind or lame. And so just very disturbing. how such a simple solution is not known, and it needs to get out there. And just last but not least, of course, pollutions. There is no pollution. Susan Regali, who I interviewed in Los Angeles, she has a catering company and a restaurant, and the county of Los Angeles would not let her use her son of a villager to cook pastries for her restaurant because they couldn't figure out how to measure emissions. She's trying to tell them there are no emissions. Bring whatever tools you got. Anyway, so that's the kind of stuff we're up against, and those are the world's ills that it definitely will be a cure for. This is just an illustration I use for when people want to go into even more depth about how sun has the perfect range of benefits. And with each step you take toward using wood and then using charcoal or going all the way to LP gas, the impacts of the environment, it may be more convenient. LP may be cleaner than some things when it burns, but it's not clean and the history is not clean. And so that may be a political point, but that, it has to be said, I think. And of course, the countries where they could use it, the whole continent of Africa basically we call them sun-rich countries. They may be resource poor and developing, but they are sun-rich. And so let's get cookers there. And the rest of the world, not a lot of difference. So just a conclusion, I am getting to a conclusion here. I feel like we are at the point where, and if you get onto Facebook and you find there's about 50 huge prepper groups, DIY groups, permaculture groups. If every one of them would actually get a solar cooker when they're harvesting their permy crop, we would make a huge dent in the environment. We would get them off of the wood that a lot of them are burning still to this day, and so forth. And I do make the note that I have 87 cookers in my collection. It is a mania. It's probably not healthy, but 34 of them are still in production. I actually did that count this morning because I thought it's probably like 15 or 20, but over a third are still in production. You can buy them if you don't have the tinkerer skills, which I don't, to make your own cookers, but you can make your own for next to nothing or free. And then just two quotes. This is my favorite. I interviewed Guay Gasco, Eighth Fire Solar in northern Minnesota. They produce solar air heaters that you just plug into your wall, from your south facing wall, and it'll pump the air into a room. He had a series of 5 of them on their plant where they put together these things. And on his website, I love this quote: "You'll never get a past due notice from the sun." I mean, if that doesn't convince people, let's start looking into solar energy for a lot of our solutions. I don't know what will. As the pocketbook often rules. And then last one, this one came up at a online webinar. Spanish is compartimos el mismo sol por igual. Todo el mundo están vecinos. All it means is we share the same sun, so we're all neighbors. We basically have to get along. Let's use that energy that the sun is providing us to our advantage. And this I won't let scroll through, except that this is a scroll of all the possible DIY models you can build. There's got to be 100 of them on solarcooking.org. And on the right is just one of dozens that Matteo Muccioli in Italy, he's insane. Every week he comes up with a different configuration of a panel cooker. And of course, as you can see from all the plans, it's basically just as close as you can come to parabola as possible, the better. And he's just he just can't give it up, which is great because everyone learns from him. He's just showing, hey, that's just aluminum foil or aluminized mylar on some poster board and squares put together with a few bolts or pins, and he's baking his torte there. So it's just incredible stuff. Last slide, well, second to last slide. I have a brother-in-law who's a coffee snob, and when I showed him this is Craig Berglund in Reno, Nevada, retired a slot machine repair guy, and he was able to sequester the out-of-date slot machine motors, and with just a little repurposing of a bundt cake pan, lawn ornament solar panels to have the thing spin at just the right rate, and a dish TV with glass mirrors. That is his coffee roasting for the day inside a screen as that bundt cake pan rolls around and turns the beans over. This is where, as Jay referred to, it's just the possibilities are limitless. The stuff you can do with solar energy, basically whatever you can do with heat or light, you can do with solar energy. And the best combination are all these food processing things. Craig, he had the longest episode of my first year going out visiting because he does everything with solar. His website, find it, Secret Solar Institute of Northern Nevada. We want it to be the worst kept secret, not in just Northern Nevada for that matter. Okay, well that's my spiel, and the top there's my YouTube channel again. I have talked to over 100 experts. People have done incredible things worldwide, probably 20 or 30 by Zoom now, but almost 100 within the states. And in 25 to 26, the next 2 years, I'm working on putting together clips from my videos and from other experts to put together a 12 module course on solar cooking. That'll just be at your own pace online with minimal quizzes, nothing really onerous. That's one of the projects I've been doing, and we're hosting, and this is just a hats off to Jay. When I first logged into the Solar Noon Tuesdays, I thought, wait a second, why don't we have one of these for the solar cooking folks or the solar thermal world? And I thought, well, with my limited scope, let's do them for solar cooking. And so that's what I've been modeling these forums after. And I make sure they're scheduled for like a Saturday at 10 in the morning and a Monday at 8 at night. So that people in India don't have to get up at 3:30 in the morning like they always do for stateside webinars and so forth, because it's really supposed to be a worldwide thing. Have been very successful, and we just had one with solar cooker makers that was just phenomenal, and they want to do it every month in 2025. And if you want to get notices and also just hear from other solar cookers around the world, Facebook, the group's SCW Net, that's the Solar Cookers World Network. It's the largest social media group, very active. I'm a moderator, so I make sure no junk stuff gets on there. Very positive conversations going on. And then last but not least, and this is the one you want to bookmark if you have not bookmarked it already, solarcooking.org, or the longer version, it goes to the same place, solarcooking.fandom.com. That's the wiki that Solar Cookers International has been maintaining for over 30 years, starting with just an HTML file archive back in the late 80s by a Microsoft employee who was deep into solar cooking. And I do not Google solar cooking or solar cookers. Google used to be fairly useful, but it's gotten really bad as far as the results. And also, there's just a lot of junk out there, stuff that's kind of okay. It doesn't really give a bad name to solar cooking, but it's really kind of a waste of time. This wiki, solarcooking.org, that's where you want to go first and foremost. And I think that is my last slide.
Well,
So,
Luther, I also just posted a link to a little booklet that we put together. So it's in the chat. So if anybody wants to grab a copy of that, it's one of those do-it-yourself things where you can make your own little solar cooker. It's one of the oven type. We always called it the couch potato solar cooker because it's made out of a beer box and some newspaper and some aluminum foil. But they work, and you got about $1 worth of material invested in it. So we cooked our meals when we were building the Earthship out there on that. And I also wanted to just add one thing. I know Tim Chavez is on the call here, and he did an interesting presentation at a conference years ago about taking water and filtering it through sand, in a bucket. And so a solar cooker, the only downside of doing that, you can get the water clean, but it still may have contaminants within it. And so we were saying, well, why not just build yourself a solar cooker? So if you're in an emergency situation and you need water, you can filter some of the water through a 5-gallon bucket of sand, but then you can pasteurize that water inside a solar cooker. I think you just have to get it to 180 degrees, if I remember right. But you can make solar cookers in an emergency situation on almost anything if you understand the principles behind what you're trying to do, and so that's
Well, I
you
know.
can
Thanks.
MacGyver your
Thanks.
way out of it.
Yeah. Speaking of MacGyver, there's a fellow who ran a makerspace in Brooklyn, Chris Hackett. And this is another thing. Get this book for your library if you're a tinkerer. It's called something like the Big Book of Maker Ideas, something like that. Chris Hackett. And he had a series that Popular Science put on cable for a while, 10 episodes, where he was plunked in the middle of like a desert in an abandoned hotel, had to survive on what he found. And he was proof positive that whatever you got around you, you can put to work. The one thing he put on YouTube was he said, well, what if there's like two tubes of water that go 90 miles away from New York City into the city for their fresh water? What if those all of a sudden get plugged up? Well, all they've got is Hudson and East River for water source. So he made a solar distiller where he was able to distill drinkable water. And he did make that point. He said at the right temperature, you have to drain off the first 5% because that's going to have all those chemical acidic chemicals that are really bad. And then after everything else should settle to the bottom. But either way, just so much that can be done there. His claim to fame is he coined the term obtainium. He said, don't buy new materials for anything when you're going to do this stuff. The most common element known to man, it's obtainium. It's stuff you can obtain from dumpsters and alleys. I know this in Minneapolis. Every other month we got this really nice, sturdy, high-grade steel bed frame dumped off in the alley, just not even in a dumpster. And I actually got a welder so I could start making use of this crap that's up in our alley all the time. But anyway, that's a great book. Chris Hackett, great book of maker ideas, I think it is. I'll look that up and put that in the chat.
Well, one other comment I had that occurred to me as you were speaking, you were talking about those, is it Fresnel lens or Fresnel lenses?
Yeah. Fresnel is one way. Fresnel is another. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get those out of those old televisions, and we had an intern who brought one just to show it off, and during the day he had leaned it against something, and we were just not paying attention to anything, and the sun as it tracked across the sky, we came back and it had burned a line through the deck where it had just like a 20-foot line it was like someone took a blowtorch and just went right across the deck. It was so those are seriously dangerous. So be sure to treat them with caution.
Yeah. Or buy Bing Goose. It's only $1,200, but he actually has it set up with a 2-axis tracker. So, and it all goes inside with reflective aluminum for the box, so that you'll never get that little scar across your deck or have your shed burst into flames.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Al's got a question here for you. Al, jump
sure.
on.
Yeah, I was interested in what you said about Eighth Fire Solar, and I looked up their website, and they are selling a number of things, but the one you mentioned was the solar thermal, and
Right.
I wondered how that differs from the old-fashioned hydro solar panels we used to put on the roof to heat hot water. It sounds like it sounds like the solar thermal panels, if that's what you call them, are mounted vertically on a south-facing wall outside. And compared to solar voltaic, they're relatively inexpensive. Are they moving some kind of fluid inside the house to provide heat,
No,
or how do they work?
it's totally air. It's just air, heat, and then the air is drawn in from underneath and inside, glass enclosed, sealed off. It's a Thermax polyisocyanurate insulation. It's a very high grade insulation, and then with just a tiny solar panel, they can blow that into the house at the right rate to heat a room. So very simple. During the solar water heaters, I know can retain the heat for a little longer after the sun goes down. These probably kind of lose within half hour or so, whatever thermal gain they get from the sun hitting it. But they will heat up. In the winter, where you just want to have as close to free energy as possible. They can't be beat. And the nice thing about it, I interviewed him from kind of an alternative channel I'm starting up for all my catch-all stuff. He says 70% of their customers just buy the kit and install it themselves because it's just put the right hole in the wall, the right shape for their little gasket thing for ducts, and you take it from there. So
Yeah, it
very
was. I was going to add about the solar thermal water heater things. I guess from Al's question is there are typically two types of those that are out there that are used for heating water that can either be the water can either be used directly, which would be an open loop system where you're heating up the water and then it is being used as hot water, or a closed loop system, and these are typically where the air temperature gets below freezing. They're a closed loop where they heat up a liquid glycol, and then there's a transfer within a tank that transfers that heat from that glycol to something that's potable, so those are the two. But if you're buying a commercial solar thermal system like that for water, they're pretty pricey. So we've seen, because of the fall off in the cost of photovoltaics, most people are simply installing a extra panels and then heating hot water conventionally, using electric, because it turns out to be more economic than having two separate systems. But that again is in the commercial realm. So it sounds like your solar heater that's heating air. I know there's a concept called like a thrombay or a throm wall
yeah.
that creates something similar to that in a very passive way. So
Yeah, there. I interviewed a guy who set up throm walls to do brooding, chicken brooding, where from the time the egg is laid to the time they've hatched and about a week beyond, the shed where they're having the chicks grow up initially is entirely solar heated, with the trom wall being the solar collector, and it lasts through the 24-hour cycle they need to keep them warm. And they find that they instead of like 10 to 20% of the chicks dying, only maybe 2 or 3% die because they're able to keep it at just the right temperature. Even with that, it's passive solar. Amazing stuff.
okay, well, great. I hope everybody found this very helpful. I really enjoyed it, Luther, and it really talks about, we focus a lot on photovoltaics, but the sun has so many. The sun is just so useful. What can I say? So, yeah, we'll bring this session to a close. I want to thank Luther for his input, and thank you all for joining in. And we'll see you. I think, as I mentioned, I may not hold these sessions until the first of the year because of the holidays and everything, but we'll get back in touch and I'll send out a notice. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.